What's up, everybody? Welcome to History Things with Pat. I'm your host, Pat McGuire. Today, we're here to talk about one of my favorite topics of the American Civil War. We're heading out to the Western Theater. We're getting out of the places like Gettysburg, Antietam, Bull Run, and all that stuff, and we're heading out to Tennessee, specifically the Middle Tennessee. We're going to talk about one of my favorite campaigns that comes late in the war, and to do that, I'm bringing along one of my special friends. You might remember him from an episode on the History Things podcast where we did a Connecting to History Through Music, where we talked about rock and roll and a bunch of awesome songs that touched on a number of topics from the First World War to the American Civil War and all the way up to things like the Irish Troubles today. He is the director of Civil War Pittsburgh. He is a contributor to Pennsylvania in the Civil War, and he is joining us from the low country of South Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, Rich Condon, welcome to History Things with Pat. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me, Pat.
So it's been a long time since I've talked to you. You've grown your hair out. I'm super jealous as a bald guy. Your beard is looking really cool as always. Got one of those too. Pretty, clubbish here. But I know that you've been hanging out outside of the Pittsburgh area, despite your brand name, Civil War Pittsburgh. Tell us a little bit about how things have been going down there in the low country. And are you getting just destroyed by mosquitoes, man? Like, I know how humid it is. It's gross.
Well, I have the full COVID-19 package going for me. I haven't had a haircut since March. I've grown my beard out. I am living in a state of humidity, even though it's mid-November. A year ago, I looked at my Facebook timeline. I was snowed into my house outside of Pittsburgh. So things are a lot different down here. And as you mentioned, I'm eaten alive on a daily basis by low country mosquitoes. However, well, the nice part is I always have, I have a beach about 15 minutes away from my apartment and plentiful seafood. So I can't complain too much.
No, nor should you. Every time you post a picture, my heart dies a little bit because I'm like, I am stuck. I mean, I'm around a bunch of really pretty scenery. Like if you asked me what I live near, I would tell you corn, a lot of it. But I do enjoy the ocean a lot. So it's gorgeous where you live, man.
Though, you have to go pretty far inland to actually start seeing some hills and mountains, which is what I'm used to being from Western Pennsylvania and living around the Maryland area for a little bit.
Well, that's why you're in the low country, as they say.
Fun fact, where I'm living here in Beaufort County is actually where most of Forrest Gump was shot.
What?
You knew that.
I know that they got a bunch of it that was done down in Savannah, because when you go down, it's like Chippewa Square or whatever, but like the bench he sits on, like that's all shot in Savannah.
Yeah, no, I mean, Savannah's only 45 minutes away.
I forgot. You're super close.
But a lot of it's shot here in Beaufort. For example, Hunting Island Beach, which is where I go almost every weekend, is where they shot the Vietnam scenes.
I could tell. It reminds me a lot of Vietnam when I see South Carolina.
Yeah, it's very Jurassic Park-like as well.
A lot of ferns and like velociraptors just.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Gosh, clever girl. Well, Rich, so we're here to talk about a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts. Obviously, I am just a big super geek about it. You actually kind of professionally worked in this area for a while. And, touching back on the fact that, we had you on the podcast to talk about music, a bulk of the time you spent, with like your major part of your music career was spent down in the Middle Tennessee area. So we both love the Franklin-Nashville campaign. Obviously, it's super decisive. You could argue that it's the effective end of significant, Confederate action outside of Virginia and North Carolina. It's kind of like a serious exclamation point, at least as far as places in the Civil War, like things like that. So could you tell the audience a little bit about sort of how we get to this moment in late November 1864 where Hood's forces are kind of on the move and stuff like that? Just sort of set the stage for how we get to Franklin.
Sure. So, first off, something to note is Franklin and Nashville, also known as the Middle Tennessee Campaign, is essentially the nail in the coffin for the Confederate Army of Tennessee. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But this all kind of starts really with the action that's taking place in the summer of 1864 around the city of Atlanta. Where you have the Confederate Army of Tennessee at that point led by Joseph E. Johnston, and kind of facing off against William Tecumseh Sherman. And you have the series of engagements taking place during the summer of 64. And, eventually, because Johnston is a good defensive commander, if we, look at William Tecumseh Sherman's history, he's more of an offensive commander, aggressive. And Johnston is going to be replaced in July of 1864. Jefferson Davis is going to have him replaced by John Bell Hood. And so, if we have any, or if we look at John Bell Hood's track record, he also is a fairly aggressive commander. So this Atlanta campaign is going to continue for some time. And, by October, November 1864, Hood is going to set his eyes elsewhere. He's essentially going to abandon this idea of trying to maintain this defense around Atlanta, and he's going to actually look toward Middle Tennessee. And there's a reason for this. John Bell Hood wants to, if possible, capture Nashville. The city of Nashville, Tennessee, long before it was Music City, and super gentrified as it is in 2020, was actually it was an important city in the West, or Western theater. In February of 1862, Ulysses S. Grant sacks Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, not too far from Nashville. And from that point, it really is a matter of days or weeks after he sacks those two forts, the Union troops capture the city of Nashville. Nashville is a major railroad hub, a supply hub. And so from that point on, from the point that the Union troops had captured Nashville, they start to fortify the city. So, by the fall of 1864, Nashville is, I believe, the second most fortified city in the world, aside from Washington, D.C. And so, but Hood looks at Nashville as, this could be an opportunity. If I can take Nashville, I can resupply my ragged, poorly supplied Confederate army. I could potentially push up toward the Ohio River. And, I don't know if this has been documented or if he said it explicitly, but, many believe that Hood's final objective is to reach Lee in Virginia, who at that point is entrenched around Petersburg.
That sounds like a Hail Mary, like even just saying it out loud at a casual drop like that.
Yeah. So, but, and it seems like a long shot, but, a lot, you have William Tecumseh Sherman's forces focused around Atlanta, in that part of Georgia.
Not burning it, just for the record out there, not burning
it. Not quite yet, but you have, George Thomas is in Nashville, a native Virginian, also Union commander. Many people know him as the Rock of Chickamauga. George Thomas has some a force of federal troops in Nashville, but not quite enough to hold off Hood's army, which at that point numbered probably about 30,000 men.
So pretty sizable force.
Yeah, maybe about 33,000 guys. So, Hood sets his eyes on Nashville. He's going to start making moves. He starts moving through, northern Alabama into southern Tennessee toward the end of November 1864. And at this point, federal troops are trying to figure out a way to assemble a force that could basically keep Hood at bay from capturing Nashville ultimately. So there's going to be federal troops dispatched from William Tecumseh Sherman's army. You have federal troops from Missouri being brought in under the command of A.J. Smith. It was elements of the, I believe it was 16th and 17th Corps. And basically just kind of piecemealing this little army together in Nashville, for this major battle they kind of saw coming. And so you have the 4th Corps under the command of Thomas Wood. You have the 23rd Corps under the command of John Schofield, who were basically going to be sent to Middle Tennessee, south of Nashville. and basically keeping Hood at bay as he's moving up through Middle Tennessee toward Nashville. So you have engagements at, Columbia, Tennessee, for example, a very small, I guess you could call it a demonstration because there's not really a major battle or anything.
Are these a series of like delaying actions, like it like intentionally
Yeah.
not meant to stop, but like slow down?
Yeah, think of it as like a race for Nashville at this point.
Okay.
Um, at Columbia, you have Schofield's force because Schofield is really kind of kind of going to assume command of both the 23rd and 4th Corps like a whole. And then so, and I'm sorry, not Thomas Wood. David Stanley's commanding the 4th Corps. I don't know why I said Thomas Wood. Anyway,
A lot of names,
yeah,
a lot of guys, a lot of people in this war.
guys.
A lot of guys.
So you have Schofield is north of the Duck River at Columbia, delaying Hood's actions. Hood starts to basically try to outflank Schofield. Schofield's guys keep retreating further north. This takes us to Spring Hill on November 29th, where you have not a major action, but there is action that takes place at Spring Hill. But it really is a really important point in the Middle Tennessee campaign of 64, where the Federal Army actually is almost cut off from Nashville. They could have been cut off had Hood's men actually cut off the Columbia or Franklin Pike, which basically leads all the way up through Middle Tennessee and still does today, from Columbia all the way to Nashville.
What causes the failure to not, cut them off? Like, how do they, like, if all they have to do is kind of sever this, travel artery, how do they not, are they just unaware of it, or are they not in a position, or are they just kind of sleeping?
A little bit of both. This is something that's disputed for years after the end of the Civil War between former Confederate commanders like Ben Cheatham and Nathan Bedford Forrest and A.P. Stewart and John Bell Hood, of course. You have
not for too long after the war, if you're talking about John Bell Hood.
Well, he dies in 1879, so he has a little bit to.
Oh yeah, sorry, thinking of the wrong guy.
Very good. And so, there is argument after the war, though, kind of passing the blame back and forth. Think end of November. It's getting dark about 4:30 or so. The real engagement at Spring Hill doesn't happen until later in the afternoon, probably about 4 or 4:30. And so as it's getting dark, a lot of these Confederate troops who have been hoofing it through Middle Tennessee, at a rapid pace, these guys are exhausted. So a lot of them, as it starts to get dark, are going to bed down for the night. And there are orders passed around. I believe initially it was Forrest who was told to cut off the road. His guys don't really have enough ammo to successfully hold off Federal troops there to come up the pike. So Ben Cheatham's guys are told to cross the pike as well. That doesn't happen. And so basically, these Confederates end up camping, about 50 or so yards off the turnpike. They leave it wide open. And
Shut up.
John Schofield and David Stanley see this really great opportunity. They do some reconnaissance. They see the roads open. And so basically, they're taking a 20,000 or so man army as well as 800 wagons up the Columbia Turnpike, basically through Confederate lines, starting at about 10 o'clock at night or so.
Just straight through the lines.
Yeah. Yep.
Nothing to see here.
And so, but there's some accounts of, Union troops even trailing off the main road into Confederate camps for some reason, thinking that it was their guys camped out. They saw the fires, asking for a pipe light or something like that. And some of these
mistake.
guys.
That's a mistake.
It's a lot of confusion, but ultimately, the night of November 29th into the early morning hours, the 30th, this Union Army is going to bypass the Confederates at Spring Hill, and they end up in Franklin, which is, a couple miles north of there. And you could see, Spring Hill is really one of the greatest blunders of the American Civil War. Um, and,
I mean, they let them go right in front of their face.
Yep. And that plays it's a major factor in the engagement that happens the next day at Franklin. Hood could be described the next morning as, I'm trying to think of how it was put.
Was he mad?
It was like riding about like an angry rattlesnake or something like that.
Oh, he was mad.
He's pretty mad, but he's going to order, his army to move north and pursue Schofield's army to Franklin. By the early morning hours of the 30th, though, Schofield's army is entrenched south of Franklin. He has 20,000 guys. He has two lines of trenches. You have the main line and the secondary line set up, and you have north of there the Harpeth River, which basically, divides Franklin from Nashville. Nashville is going to sit about roughly 15 to 20 miles north. And anyway, there are a couple of bridges that cross the Harpeth near Franklin, and those bridges were destroyed. Well, you had a railroad bridge. You can't really get wagons across that very well. You had a county bridge, I believe, across the Harpeth as well. That was destroyed. And I believe George Thomas in Nashville was supposed to send pontoon bridges so Schofield could safely cross the Harpeth River and head up to Nashville. However, those pontoon bridges are not there.
What is with the Federal Army not getting pontoons to where they need to go on time?
That's the lack of communication. If they just had some cell phones, things would be a lot different.
Dude, didn't they learn anything from Fredericksburg? Get the pontoons there.
Well, so at this point, Schofield, and this is the early morning of the 30th, Schofield rides from the north of Franklin down to the south of Franklin, and he's going to place Jacob Dolson Cox, who is formerly an Eastern Theater guy.
Sure.
Places him effectively in command of field forces south of Franklin, while Schofield is going to oversee operations, building these bridges across the Harpeth. And as the day kind of grinds on, more federal troops are trickling in. You have guys from George Wagner's division arriving. Those guys really saw a majority of the action down at Spring Hill the day before, and they're the last guys to leave Spring Hill. And so as a result, Wagner's guys get to Franklin last. They're basically fighting or skirmishing with some of Hood's guys between Spring Hill and Franklin, for several miles. And so they're wiped out. They're exhausted. You have Wagner placed his division in front of the main Union line, about a half mile in front of the Union line, basically camped in an open field. And you have one of his brigades under Emerson Updike continue up the pike and actually go behind the main Union line. Only reason I mention this is he plays a very important role during the battle. But Confederates start to come up the pike. They come over Winstead Hill. If anybody has ever, been to Franklin before, and if you haven't, I highly recommend it.
For sure, go.
Winstead Hill sits about 2 miles south of where the Union line was at Franklin. That's basically going to be where Confederate headquarters are set up when they finally arrive in Franklin, about noon on the 30th. And federal troops basically, they don't think Confederates are going to actually make an attack at Franklin because it just didn't seem feasible. I mean, if you see Franklin in 1864, it's a wide open field. It's about 2 miles wide and about 2 miles, as I said, from Winstead Hill to the Union line. Imagine Pickett's charge on a much grander scale.
I was going to say, well, obviously they've learned their lesson between Malvern Hill and Longstreet's assault not to do this, right? Like, don't tell me they're going to do this, Rich. They've done it twice.
They're going to do it.
They're going to do it 3 times. Ah!
And, this is where there's some controversy between different historians as to why and even between other Confederate commanders as to why Hood is going to order a full frontal assault on the Union lines at Franklin. Some people say it's because he's mad at his commanders for letting Union troops basically humiliate them the night before. Some people blame it on the rumor that Hood's on laudanum at that point, which evidence points to the fact that he was not on drugs on November 30th, 1864. And also you have to take into consideration, John Bell Hood is basically doing this as a desperate act. It's an act of desperation because he is determined to take the city of Nashville. And he knows that if John Schofield's army is to make it out of Franklin into the lines at Nashville, he'll be greatly outnumbered. And that is what's going to happen. But regardless, he gives the order to attack, and Confederates are going to step off at 4 o'clock that day on November 30th.
2 miles.
2 miles. And actually, at this point, Hood has roughly 20,000 guys, so it's pretty even numbers between them and the Federal forces. He left one corps down in Columbia under S.D. Lee. So Hood's going to launch this attack. Keep in mind, it's going to get dark probably about 5 o'clock or so. So most of the fighting that's done at Franklin is at night.
I got a hard time just kind of like trying to put my mind in the like my brain in the mindset of these commanders. Like this one confounds me a little bit, and probably why there's so much controversy with historians is because like I don't think like, especially for a guy like Hood, who you could argue existed in the higher echelons of the executive Confederate field leadership because he was in Lee's army, and Lee was by 64 was the undeniable figurehead. So you can't like, it's hard for me to believe that Hood didn't understand the cost of like losing men. So like, one, I have a hard time subscribing to that he was pissed at his commanders because like, regardless, like you're not just going to go and get thousands of men chewed up because you're mad at a couple subordinates. Like, what does that actually accomplish? Nothing. And two, like I also then have a hard time just reconciling that he would step off for this attack knowing how 2 previous charges have gone for armies he's been associated with, 62 and like I said, in Malvern Hill, 63 in Gettysburg. Like, it's weird, man, that he makes this decision to go.
What got him in this position, though, is, he's known as an aggressive commander. And that's what the Army of Tennessee needed at that point in time. And that's why they're going to end up here. And,
Too bold. Too bold.
Too bold. And so, this attack is launched, as I mentioned before, George Wagner's division, about 3,000 guys, are sitting a half mile in front of the main line of Union trenches. Basically, Hood saw George Wagner's guys as an advantage. This 3,000 man division is a human shield. If he were to break George Wagner's division and follow them to the main line of Union trenches, he assumes that Union troops aren't going to fire on their own guys. They follow them into the main line and they can bust a hole in the center of the Federal line. Basically kind of like what Lee was trying to do at Gettysburg.
Right.
Hood's actually fairly successful with this attack. George Wagner had basically told his men who were standing a half mile in front of the main line, that if any man tries to break and run, they're to be shot or bayoneted by the sergeants in line. So they're being kept out there. They are going to try to dig a crude trench, but that doesn't quite work out. But anyway, Hood's guys hit George Wagner's line about 4:30 or so, and then they follow George Wagner's guys to the main line. They bust a hole in the Federal line in the center. And I mentioned Emerson Updike's brigade. Right. Those guys are actually camped on the northern side of Carter Hill, behind the main Union line. And once they kind of hear all this commotion happening, they eventually realize that the line's been broken. About 1,200 guys, I believe, in Updike's brigade are going to come charging over Carter Hill and kind of plug the gap in the main Union line. Now, most of the casualties taken are probably in the first hour or so, maybe hour and a half, during the fighting. a lot of the casualties are going to be taken, during this breakthrough. But throughout over the next couple of hours, between say 5 o'clock and 10 or 9 o'clock, there's back and forth fighting, hand-to-hand combat. Guys are firing at each other, from say 10 yards away, if that. It's really brutal, and ultimately the fighting kind of ceases around about 10 o'clock at night. You have 7,500 roughly Confederate casualties and about 2,500 Union. It's a bit one-sided.
Yeah,
but that's why I say like this is kind of,
that went just as well as the other 2 times.
Yep. And so, that's why I said this is kind of like the nail in the coffin. This is the beginning of the end of the Army of Tennessee. Confederates are kind of waiting there, and probably about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, moving into December 1st, they notice that the Federal Army is pretty much gone. Those guys have successfully reconstructed bridges going across the Harpeth River. Federal forces move north. They're on their way to Nashville, and they're going to get there within the next couple of hours. These Schofield's guys are basically within the safety of Nashville by December 2nd. Hood's guys are there, left to bury the dead, but they're going to actually be kind of in hot pursuit of Schofield's guys. And even though they lost so many people, including six generals at Franklin, they're still going to move north on Nashville. And at this point, their numbers had dwindled significantly.
Are they just showing face at this point, like as an army, or like does Hood legitimately believe he's got a fighting chance, especially after Franklin?
I think he was actually trying to pull forces from other locations, unsuccessfully doing so. And also keep in mind, too, some of the guys in Hood's army of Tennessee who are actually from Tennessee start to desert. So some of these guys basically figure, it's pretty much over. I'm going home. And there are some guys that do that.
So that's why I asked if Hood's maybe just saving face, because like after the Atlanta campaign, like it's no secret, Jeff Davis is pretty blown about, Atlanta, and he does his classic upheaval of leadership thing that he does. And obviously like Hood's not removed from command, but he's kind of chastised. He comes out and meets him, and like they make a plan together. Like imagine being micromanaged by your boss, like he's like, we're doing this together. I guess, he shifts Hardee out, but PGT Beauregard is now put in command overall. Like, so there's a whole lot of like, I'm watching you, from Jeff Davis at Hood. And I guess like part of me feels like after that, it's like, what else? Like I have to attack, like essentially.
I saw Franklin as a victory for him, even though Schofield ultimately achieved what he was going for. He was basically just trying to buy time.
Right.
Schofield did what he was supposed to do. So you could really consider it a Union victory, even though, the Confederates remain in command of the field after the fight. But ultimately, they're being set up for failure. So, even though Hood still marches on Nashville and they entrench themselves south of the city, he doesn't have a large enough force to launch an offensive. Like I said, he lost about 7,500 guys there. He's going to be joined by S.D. Lee's Corps, the guys I mentioned who were left at Columbia. That'll bump his numbers back up to a little over 20,000 guys, probably. So Hood has roughly 20,000 men south of Nashville, say by December 5th even, or December 6th. And they're going to have a roughly 4-mile line of trenches and redoubts that they're going to construct. By the time Schofield reaches Nashville, the Union Army is going to have about at least 55,000 guys in Nashville. Actually, much more than that, I think. Because, you have A.J. Smith's guys who'd come in from Missouri. Now you have the 4th and 23rd Corps. And, Thomas has kind of piecemealed this whole, kind of adjunct army together. And then he also has federal cavalry under the command of James Wilson.
Plus you have the fortifications.
And the fortifications. Yeah,
I mean, you have
exactly.
like you have some massive forts there that have some really long range guns. So like aside from having to engage in a infantry fight with a daunting enemy, as the Confederates would see them, like they're vastly outnumbering us, things like that. Oh, the long arm of the army would hit them very easily before they even got close, like that. There's a lot to say, don't do this. You know, if you're a Confederate commander, there's a lot in your little packet of logistics that says this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
But yet it happens.
So, Thomas he's going to receive, I guess, some pushback from, Henry, Ulysses S. Grant, who obviously is out near Petersburg at that point. And he's basically saying, like, crush him right now, get it over with, and just finish him off. And Thomas basically is stalling because he's waiting on James Wilson's cavalry to kind of, they had been pretty heavily engaged throughout the first part of this campaign. So they're kind of recouping and getting re-equipped and everything, getting some rest. So Thomas is waiting for Wilson's guys to kind of get it together before he feels confident in launching an assault on Hood's men south of the city. So Grant actually is getting ready to replace Thomas by about December 14th. Grant actually was going to replace Thomas with John Schofield, who had just arrived from Franklin. And actually, I believe at one point, Grant was actually getting ready to ride out to Nashville personally and replace Thomas. And basically, they decide that, if Thomas does not launch an assault or make any kind of moves, by the time Grant gets there, then he's being replaced. But, keep in mind too, there's really bad weather at this point in December. Thomas, I think, wanted to launch an assault by December 10th. But then, around Nashville, you have all this sleet and snow and rain and ice and basically the worst weather you can think of, fog, preventing him from launching any kind of effective assault. And so, this also halts his plans for a little while. But ultimately, by December 14th, he decides, we're gonna make this assault on December 15th. So his plan essentially is to kind of do like a fake out punch. He's going to basically feign an assault on the Confederate right while launching his main attack on the Confederate left. And it is pretty successful.
Pulling an okey doke.
Exactly. And so, but he's successful. He pushed the Confederates back out of their defenses, and they ultimately end up falling back about 2 miles south of Nashville. I'm sorry, 2 miles south of their original line of works. And so this all happens on December 15th. And December 16th is really the decisive day where, Thomas pulls the same one too. He's going to send this feigning action on the Confederate right and attack them again on the Confederate left. And this is, I want to talk real quick about the United States colored troops that actually take part in this engagement, because, it's going to be one of the really big defining moments for United States colored troops during the Civil War. You have, I believe it was 8 regiments of USCT troops there.
Wow.
And these guys they're going to be engaged on December 15th, but also most notably on the 16th, they're going to be attacking a place called Overton's Hill, also known as Peach Orchard Hill. You have I believe it was the 100th, 12th, and 13th USCT troops attacking Peach Orchard Hill, and they're going to take pretty significant casualties. The 13th USCT in particular, I think they had about 900 guys, and they take close to 250 casualties in this engagement.
Wow.
They came up on a Confederate line that I believe was kind of well concealed, and when they get right up, I believe about 30 feet away, they're going to open up on them. And after the engagement, after all is said and done, when George Thomas is going across the battlefield and kind of observing the damage, I guess you could say. He actually is recorded as saying, "The question is settled. Negro soldiers will fight," because it was said before that Thomas didn't really have complete faith in African American soldiers in the U.S. Army as an effective fighting force. After Nashville, his mind has completely changed, as well as many other people.
Wow.
And anyway, that's something that I wanted to point out. If you go to what is left of Nashville battlefield today, which there isn't much left, there is actually a historical marker at the site of Peach Orchard Hill that denotes the action that took place there, in particular, what the USCT troops had done at Peach Orchard Hill. I actually believe years ago, maybe the 70s or 80s, they were building a Red Roof Inn not too far away from Peach Orchard Hill, and they actually dug up some USCT soldier graves in the process.
Where would they move to? Do you know? National Cemetery?
I believe they were taken to the National Cemetery, which is in East Nashville, like the Inglewood area, if anyone's familiar with Nashville. Yes, they would have been taken up that way. But anyway, this engagement of the second day is really what this is all going to pivot on. Those guys attack on the Confederate right flank, but on the left is, you have a place called Compton's Hill, which would be renamed Shies Hill, and that's what it's known as today, where heavy hand-to-hand fighting takes place, and ultimately the Confederate line is kind of rolled up on their left flank, and the entire Confederate line just falls apart. If you visit Nashville battlefield today, that's another site that is actually one of the few that's preserved, is Shies Hill. You can still see, evidence of trenches on the top of the hill, and that's kind of where the problem lies. Actually, the reason that hill falls is because when Confederates retreated from that initial position on the 15th, 2 miles south, they dug trenches on Compton's Hill, but they dug those trenches on the physical crest of the hill and not the military crest, which, if you're familiar with that, it's a little bit down from the very top of the hill, and that plays against them ultimately when Union troops attack Compton's Hill. The reason it's called Shies Hill now is the commander of the 20th Tennessee Infantry, William Shy, is killed and I believe bayoneted to a tree on Compton's Hill, and he was actually a local guy from Middle Tennessee. But anyway, the whole Confederate line kind of falls apart when that hill falls. And
I'm sorry, go back. Bayoneted, like ran through and like into a tree?
Pretty sure that's how it happened, yeah.
That is grisly, dude.
The 20th Tennessee gets torn up pretty bad on Compton's Hill. Thomas Benton Smith, who was previously the commander of the 20th Tennessee. At that point, he was actually commanding the brigade of which the 20th was part of. He's actually beaten over the head by an Ohio officer with like the butt of his sword, and it was said that part of his brain was exposed because he was beaten so severely, and basically the rest of his life he was kind of left. He was an invalid.
Well, yeah,
so, like,
brain
guys,
injury.
It gets really brutal on top of Compton's Hill. And actually, I want to share real quick. There's an account. The 49th Tennessee Infantry, for example, served at Franklin, and they got eaten up pretty bad there. They were combined with a few other units by the time they got to Nashville. And one of the guys, actually the chaplain of the 49th, kept a detailed diary. And he writes about kind of the downfall of the Confederate Army at Nashville. And so I just want to share this real quick with you. Yeah. He said, in a little while, there was a cessation of the heavy firing, and looking up the road, I saw our men running toward us in confusion. It was plain that our line was broken and that the enemy would soon be upon us. At once, the teams were hitched to the wagons and the ambulances, and they moved off at a gallop. Directly, the retreating soldiers were upon us. Then I realized that it was a panic. I could not find what had happened. Every man seemed only anxious to save himself. I ran with them, and as the mass of fugitives increased, the panic grew. Every man had some dreadful tale. According to these stories, Yankee batteries would soon be in position on a rise in the road just behind us and would blow us all to smithereens. And there were at least 100,000 Yankees on our track. I ran as fast as I could, and the faster I ran, the worse I was scared. I could almost feel the grape and canister plugging me in the back. I had plenty of company scared as badly as I was. And he goes on here. We were thus exposed to the crossfire of our own men and the Yankees. As we ran through a dense hazel thicket, the bullets seemed to cut every twig. 3 years afterwards, I was passing along the Hillsborough Road, and I turned aside and went across a field to that thicket, and every bush bore the marks of that fierce fusillade. Yet we were not touched by a bullet or shell. And then he kind of goes on and actually talks about as they're retreating from Nashville, and this kind of gives you an idea of this chaos that's unfolding. He's picking up pots and pans that people dropped when they're discarding them and basically trying to hit the road and run south. But it's basically mass confusion. And from that point on, from the evening of December 16th, Hood's Confederate Army is going to book it for the Alabama line, back to where they came from. And so Hood's guys are going to be pursued by Union cavalry, especially, kind of nipping at their heels as they move back through middle southern Tennessee. And Hood's guys are going to cross the river back into Alabama about 10 days later.
What's Hood's strength at that point? What do you think his army's at, like size-wise?
I'll give you an idea. So the 49th Tennessee, for example, had, I believe it was about 38 guys between Franklin and Nashville. And then they have maybe less than 10 guys after Nashville. So you have a lot of these units that you're going to see kind of starting to condense, actually, after Nashville. Like, his army's obliterated. It's estimated that by early January of 65, he probably has about 18,000 men. And so the Army of Tennessee is a shell of its former self. As I mentioned earlier, these guys were poorly equipped when they left Atlanta, even more so after Nashville. These guys are missing shoes, missing hats. They're still wearing summer uniforms. They don't have any winter clothing. A lot of guys are missing blankets. A lot of them don't have tents. They're at that point, actually, by the winter of 64, a lot of these guys are, they're killing cattle and using cattle hides and sewing them around their feet as some kind of protection. Jeez. So it's not looking good. And you can imagine why, some guys who are from the Tennessee area are going to
go home,
abandon this idea of the rebellion and go home.
Yeah.
And so, Hood is actually going to tender his resignation on January 18th. And it's just a matter of time before everything falls apart.
I mean, it sounds like everything's falling apart for the Confederacy, just specifically at that point, because you have, let's just do a state of where the war's at. At the end of the year, you have, the Union, like Grant's army is pressing on Lee right around Richmond and all, like the Petersburg siege is well underway, right? You have Phil Sheridan's out in the valley just wreaking havoc everywhere. He's smashed up, what was left of Jubal Early's guys out there. And now the action in the West, has kind of just come to a definitive halt or an end, because it's not even like there's much left. You can't even say halt. Like, that implies that you're going to get going again. There's no getting going after this. Like, it is just
Nashville's the nail in the coffin.
It's done. So now all eyes then turn towards the Eastern Theater again, even though the West, I guess, when Johnston's in North Carolina, and this Civil War is confusing, but essentially we get to sort of put a close out on the traditionally interpreted Western theater. We're gonna kind of look towards states like Virginia and North Carolina, which I guess still gets qualified as Western theater, because a lot of what's left of Hood's army is going to show up there and stuff like that. But
The Army of Tennessee operating in North Carolina, so some people do consider North Carolina to be part of the Western Theater. Then
geographically, it's just impossible for me to do that, knowing it's an East Coast state.
Yep, yep.
I can read a map.
Think of 1865. A goal is for Lee to link up with with the Army of Tennessee, kind of bringing this Eastern Western theater thing full circle if you think about it, even though it never happens. So yeah, that's it.
I mean, Johnston gets closer to that than Hood. When I mentioned the Hail Mary earlier, like Johnston gets within a couple 100 miles only between not Bentonville. That's where the battle happens. Where does Johnston's surrender in May take place? Blanking.
Bennett.
Bensonville? Bennett Place?
Bennett Place.
Bennett Place. Between there and Appomattox, only a couple 100 miles. I think it's a lot closer between those 2 points than it would be from like Nashville to, Petersburg. So it's pretty wild, man. Well,
it's not very far. I'm trying to think of where Bennett Place is. Durham.
Oh, Durham. I'm a baseball guy. They got the Durham Bulls down there.
Listen, I'm a little slow tonight, so I apologize. There's been a couple times where it's come to me, a few moments later. So
it's all good. Well, as we sort of wind down and close out here, let's talk a little bit about how you came to sort of acquire all this information and become such a seasoned storyteller. You spent a little bit of time working for the Trust, the Battle of Franklin Trust, correct? Or working with them?
That was actually my first public history related job. I worked for them for a few years when I was living in Nashville, and I made the 20-minute trek to Franklin every day for work. And, I was a battlefield guide, but also did tours at Carnton Plantation and Carter House, which are on the battlefield.
Yep.
And then, kind of moving from there, I did work for Soldiers and Sailors Memorial and Museum in Pittsburgh, kind of working more in their archives department. A short stint with the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. Shout out to Jake Wynn.
What up, Jake?
And and then that's kind of where I and I was an intern at Harper's Ferry. But then when I was at the Civil War Medicine Museum, that's kind of where I got my start with the Park Service. The reason I say it was a short stint is I was offered a job at Flight 93 National Memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where I worked for 2 seasons. And now I'm in Beaufort County, beautiful Beaufort County, South Carolina, working at Reconstruction Era National Historical Park.
How do you find that's awesome, man? You've had, and like for being such a young guy, man, you've had like quite a really like cool historical journey through, various trusts and museums and Park Service gigs, man. Like it's really awesome. And like our future as historians is bright because of guys like you. So keep up the good work and all that. What's it been like working at a post-war site, when we spend all this time talking about the actual years of the fighting and things like that? What's it like for you to sort of switch gears and transition into more of the Reconstruction story, which has such a complex and controversial history all of its own?
Yeah, well, so, the way that we define Reconstruction actually includes the Civil War, because we actually start Reconstruction with the end of 1861, the fall of 1861, going all the way to 1900. So, I get to talk about stuff like, the 1st South Carolina Infantry and the 33rd United States Colored Troops in Camp Saxton, but also it's really beneficial because what does this all mean? Like working previously at other sites, we talk about the nuances of troop movements and army movements and camp life and things like that. But why did this all have to happen in the first place, and what happened as a result of this war? What happened ultimately as a result of this fighting? And that's something that we discuss on a daily basis. What happened after 1865 to the nation and to certain demographics of the nation. So it's been a great experience, I have to say.
I would say so, man. Like when I think about the places you've worked, I think about just what an interesting perspective you've had on like the concept of like freedoms, because in one setting you're talking about, emancipation and then the establishment of, this new birth of freedom. And then at your Flight 93, we're talking about how we sort of morphed into the new world where we live in, right? The age of terrorism and like defending freedoms in the way that
Yeah.
we perceive them to be and things like that. So like it's pretty wild, and I look forward to whatever books you're going to start churning out when you get older and getting gray hairs in those beards and all that experience and wisdom and all that. So, any parting words, Rich, before we get out of here? Where can people find you on social media to follow along with all your like hard work? I know that the Park Service has its own stuff, but you do a lot of work, obviously, with Civil War Pittsburgh and Penn Civil War. Tell us where to find you.
Yeah, so with Civil War Pittsburgh, we do have a site, civilwarpittsburgh.com. Also on Instagram and Facebook, and more recently Twitter. It took me a very long time to actually subscribe to the Twitter world, but it's there now. Aside from that, we have Penn Civil War, or Pennsylvania in the Civil War, which can be found on pretty much all social media as well, same as Civil War Pittsburgh. And so, unfortunately with COVID-19, it's been kind of hard to do something that we've always loved doing, which is doing kind of live feeds. Not quite like this, but, like out in the field with groups of people.
Yeah.
I miss that a lot. But, if anything, if there's any silver lining to a global pandemic, it's the fact that we kind of are able to find ways around that and do programs like this, like what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which I think is super helpful and really beneficial for people in general, is a way to get their information. So, I think even after there is a cure found for coronavirus, that this kind of thing is going to continue for years to come, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this pandemic for sure has ushered in like a very long overdue sort of modernization as far as how we present and interpret history and use of things like technologies and social media. So as negative as this year has been as a whole, like there have been, and you don't even have to look too hard to find them, but there have been some shining spots. And like I agree, this sort of use of technology, the Zoom, like I'm in Maryland and you're in South Carolina, right? When we did this once before for the podcast, you were down there still, but I was actually a little closer to you. I was in North Carolina. So like I was able to travel and still communicate and do this. So it's been it's been a blessing to be able to sort of have these resources at our disposal to keep ourselves going. So
I would say that is a good thing in 2020. Out of all the terrible things of 2020, I think we found a little bit of light, and that's good.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for spending some time with me, man. I know that the work is hard and never ending down there, both for Civil War Pittsburgh and for Reconstruction. So I know you got to get some rest. Up here swinging hammers is tiring, and doing a lot of the First World War coverage that I did earlier in November. It was really exhausting to try to balance all that, writing and creative content and stuff. So let's call it a night. I appreciate you spending some time with me and all the folks here at History Things with Pat. Make sure you check out Rich again at Civil War Pittsburgh and at Pennsylvania in the Civil War. I'm your host, Pat McGuire. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at History Things with Pat. It's been a hell of a ride, and we'll catch you all next time. Later.
Thank you.